Hey everybody, welcome back to a new video. In this video, we're going to be checking out a large new power station. This is the Oupes 1800. Now, I've had a lot of people ask me about this power station. I'm excited to show you guys how it performs. Now, I have reviewed two other Oupes power stations on my channel, the Oupes 1200 and the 600 model, and this one's basically the biggest of them all. This has lithium iron phosphate chemistry inside, and it's rated at 2,500 life cycles to 80% capacity. So you can discharge it and charge it 2,500 times. Then you're supposed to only lose the top 20% of the battery. So you should get a lot of battery out of the cells inside. Now the naming on this is a little bit confusing. Like I said, this is the Oupes 1800, and it's named after its 1800 watt pure sine wave inverter. The actual capacity on this is much lower at only 1,500 watt hours. It's technically rated at 1,488 watt hours. So the name is a little bit misleading, and it should be priced at around a 1,500 watt hour power station. Now this is actually priced on their website with an MSRP of $1,700. Now it is on sale for $1,400, so at the sale price of $1,400, it comes in at a price per watt hour at around 94 cents. Now usually if the power station is priced above 80 cents a watt hour, you get some really fancy features like UPS mode or a smart app or ultra fast charging. And this power station really doesn't have any of those, so I'm kind of curious about the pricing on this, but we'll go ahead and test this power station and see how it performs. We're gonna go through all the details of the DC output, the AC inverter. We're gonna talk about charging and do some charging demos. And at the end, we're going to talk about how it performed and compare it to some of the other competition to see which option you guys need to buy. Now, I know the market is so saturated and it's hard to choose a power station, and that's what these reviews are for. They're to give you an unbiased opinion about which power station is going to work best for your use case. So hopefully at the end of the video, you'll be able to make a decision because you guys work hard for your money and I don't want you to waste it on anything. So let's go ahead and jump into the power station and we'll see if this is the right one for you. Let's go ahead and take a second to talk about the DC output on this power station. Starting at the bottom, you have a power switch, then you can see it enabled on the display here. You have a 12-volt cigarette plug with the dust cover at top, and then you have two 5521 barrel connections, and all three of these can max out for a total of 10 amps. We'll be testing that a little bit later. You have two USB-C power delivery ports that are rated at 60 watts each, and then you have two USB-A ports that are Quick Charge 3.0. Now I have both of my battery load testers plugged into the DC output so we can do extensive testing. Now the first test that I want to do is to see how well the output is regulated, so let's go ahead and take a look. Now when there's no load on the power station, it looks like the output is regulated at 12.7 volts. This is what we're getting on the 12-volt cigarette plug, and 12.6 volts is what we're getting on the barrel connections. Now the maximum amount of power that we're able to pull from the 12-volt cigarette plug is 10.9 amps or around 132 watts. Now I was able to get similar results out of the 5521 connection, 132 watts or 10.9 amps. Now this last test is to see how much power I can pull combined from both of these ports at the same time. So I have this one set to around 5 amps, this one set to around 6 amps. Let's go ahead and turn it up until it shuts off. Okay, so it turns right off at around 135 watts. Now another test that I like to do on the DC output is to make sure that it doesn't have any auto shut-off settings. Now a great way to test that is by plugging in a 12-volt compressor fridge, because this will cycle on and off over a long period of time. Now the issue you have is some power stations, when they sense less than 5 watts, they'll shut off the DC output. So this is a good way just to see if it's going to stay enabled over 24 hours. So I have my fridge plugged in. Let's go ahead and see if it's still running 24 hours later.
24 hours later.
Well, it's been 24 hours and the DC output of the power station is still enabled, so there are no auto shut-off settings whenever you're trying to use the DC output for a long period of time. Now during this test, we only used around 25% of the battery's capacity, meaning this also has a very low parasitic drain whenever you leave the DC output enabled for a long period of time. For example, we ran the fridge and left the DC output on, and we only lost around 1% per hour, which is really good. Now just remember, my basement's around 70 degrees, so running a 12-volt compressor fridge at 70 degrees, the compressor doesn't have to run that much. So you will see a lot more power usage if it's warmer outside, because then the fridge has to run more. But the main purpose of this test was just to verify that the DC output stayed enabled, and it's good, we don't have any issues there. In the next test, what I want to do is test the USB-C outputs. So I'm attempting to charge two smaller power stations. Let's go ahead and look at the results. So on the left here, I have the Oupes 600. It supports 60 watts input and it's charging at 60 watts. And then on the right here, I have the Energizer 320. It supports 100 watts input through USB-C and it's only charging at 18 watts. So pretty interesting. Let's go ahead and swap the cables and see what happens. Okay, so I've swapped the cables. The Oupes is plugged into the side that was getting 18 watts and the Energizer was plugged into the side that was getting 60 watts. So let's see what happens. Oop, this one's going above 60 watts. Oh, and look at that. It shut off the DC output because this one was able to pull more than 60 watts even though the port itself was rated at 60 watts output. Okay, so just as a reminder, this is a 60 watt port and this is a 60 watt port. However, we're only able to get 18 watts out of this one and we can get 60 watts out of this one. But if we have a device that pulls more than 60 watts, it tries to pull more than 60 watts and shuts off the output. So let's do one last test. Let's test both of these by themselves to see if we can get 60 watts out of each of them, or if this one gets 60 and this one does 18 only. Okay, so I plugged the Energizer by itself into the right port. You can see we're charging at 18 watts. It is not a 60 watt port, it is an 18 watt port only. Now plugging in the Energizer to the left-hand port, I'm guessing it's going to go over 60 watts and shut off the output. Yep, there it goes. And it shuts off. Now if this layout sounds familiar, it definitely is. Look at the Oupes 1200. It has a 60 watt port and an 18 watt port. So maybe they just pushed the same firmware update to this because this is acting the same way, except for we have a few extra bugs. For example, when we plug a 100 watt device into this, it goes over 60 watts and then shuts off the DC output. So this power station definitely has a few bugs with the USB-C and it needs a firmware update. Now I wanted to check the owner's manual to see what it said about this. And turning to the USB specifications, you can see it says 60 watts on the left and 18 watts on the right. And the power station says 60-60. So either they copied and pasted this from the Oupes 1200 or it's a misprint on the actual device. Okay, so the last test that I want to do on the DC output is a full discharge test. So I have it charged up to 100%. We're going to use my battery load tester to take it all the way down until the DC output shuts off to show how many usable watt hours we can expect on this power station. So let's go ahead and start the test. Okay, so I'm pulling 130 watts through my battery load tester. It's expecting around a 10-hour runtime, so I'll go ahead and let this run and I'll come back when it shuts off.
Many hours later.
Okay, so the power station just hit 0% and shut off the DC output. Let's go ahead and take a look at the results. So we were able to pull 1211.89 watt hours, or the equivalent of 97.92 amp hours. And hey look, the test actually ran for 10 hours, so the estimated time remaining was pretty accurate. Now this power station has an advertised capacity of 1488 watt hours. So if we take our result of 1211 and divide it by 1488, that gives us 81.3% of the advertised capacity when using the DC output. Now I usually like to see at least 85% of the advertised capacity on a discharge test like this, so it is a little disappointing that we only pulled 81%. Now in the next portion of the video, I want to talk about the AC inverter on this power station. Now you can turn it on and off by pushing this button down here. Now this is advertised to have a continuous output of 1800 watts and a surge of 4000 watts. There are 3 individual AC outlets with these faux grounding plugs, and it's advertised to be a pure sine wave inverter putting out 100 to 120 volts. So let's go ahead and plug in my oscilloscope and see what we get. Okay, so we're getting 110 volts output with no load on the AC inverter. And it is a pure sine wave output sitting at 60 hertz. So let's go ahead and put a max load on this inverter and see if we get any difference with the sine wave or the voltage, and see if we can handle it for 15 minutes. Okay, so I started the max load test. We're pulling around 1761 watts, which is really close to the 1800 max. See the timer's going at 27 seconds, and we're sitting at 109 volts. So we're gonna let this run for 5 minutes and I'll come back and check in on it. Okay, so we just passed the 5-minute mark and we're sitting at 83%, still pulling around 1750 watts. Now, if you look at this, we're actually getting a really good sine wave output. It just looks really clean. So this is really good so far on the actual output. We'll go ahead and give it another 5 minutes, come back in and check at the 10-minute mark. Okay, so we're coming up on the 11-minute mark. We're sitting at 109 volts on the inverter, so nothing's changed there. Battery's sitting at 70% and still pulling around 1746 watts. The air that's coming out is just slightly warm. Let's go ahead and see how loud the fans are. So right up next to the power station, it's right around 55 to 56 decibels. Okay guys, we just passed the 15-minute mark, pulling near maximum output on the power station inverter. Still getting a pure sine wave output, and the air coming out of the power station is not very warm at all. So this did pass the test of a max run test for 15 minutes. Okay, so the last test that I want to do on the AC inverter is a full capacity test. So we're going to take this from 100% all the way down until the AC inverter shuts off. And we're going to track all the power going out using this watt meter. So this has an advertised capacity of 1488 watt hours. So let's go ahead and start the test. We're going to be draining this at a 0.2C rate, or right around 300 watts, and we'll see how many watt hours we can pull. Okay, so the test just finished. The power station's sitting at 0%. Now the inverter did shut off, but I'm actually able to turn it back on so we can actually see what the results are here. So we pulled a total of 1320 watt hours. Now if we take the 1320 watt hours that we got in this test and divide it by the advertised capacity of 1488, that gives us 88.7% of the advertised capacity. Now I always like to see 85%, so in this test we actually got above that at 88%. Now there are a few other tests that I ran on the AC inverter. The first one would be an actual parasitic drain test, meaning if I had this fully charged up to 100% and left the AC inverter on, how much background power would it use as it didn't have any load on it? So what I did is I charged it up to 100%, left the AC inverter on, and after an hour it only dropped down to 99%, which means that this has a very low parasitic drain of 1% per hour. Now the next test that I did on this was actually to test the AC inverter to see if it was a noisy AC inverter or not. So I plugged in my guitar amp to the inverter itself, and this is what it sounded like. And then I also plugged it into my grid power, and this is what it sounded like. So as you can see, very similar outputs. This actually does have a very clean AC inverter. Under load, I didn't notice any distortion or any noise on it, so very impressed with the AC inverter, and also we were able to get the 88% of the advertised capacity. So overall, I'd say the AC inverter is probably the best feature on this power station because it's clean, has a very low parasitic drain, and you actually get a lot of the advertised capacity. In the next section of the video, I want to talk about charging up the Oupes 1800. Now on the front of the power station, you have two charging input jacks. Each of these are an 8mm style connection, and they can be used at the same time. Now out of the box, there are two different ways to charge this up. You have this DC to DC charging style cable with a 12-volt cigarette plug and the 8mm connection. And then you get the wall adapter that you can charge off AC power, and it also has an 8mm connection. Let's go ahead and do a demo on each of these. We'll start with the DC to DC charging cable. So I just plugged that cable into the Oupes 1200 12-volt socket and plugged the other end into the 8mm connection here to charge it up. You see we're getting around 90 watts charging input. Now because the Oupes 1800 has two charging ports, if you happen to have another 12-volt source and a charging cable, you can dual charge this at 12 volts for around 190 watts. Now the second way to charge up this power station is by using the included wall charger. And when you plug that in, you can get around 187 watts. Now because this power station has 1500 watt hours of capacity, to charge this up, it's going to take around 8 hours using one charging brick. Now if you're able to use two wall chargers at the same time because it has two charging jacks, you can charge at a total of 374 watts to cut that time in half to a full charge time of around 4 hours. Now this does not come with two adapters. This is the Oupes 1200 charger, which is the same as the Oupes 1800, and using both of them at the same time gives you 374 watts. Now I will admit that I do not like having external charging bricks because it just adds to all the stuff you have to bring with you whenever you're using one of these portable power stations. Most of the newer power stations come without charging bricks, and the charger is built into the power station. So kind of annoying that you have to have two of these charging bricks to get it to charge at a reasonable level. Now I also wanted to verify if these USB-C ports were bidirectional, meaning that you could charge the power station by plugging in a charging source. So I have my Kaval desktop USB-C charger, and I plugged it into either of these options, and as you can see, it has no charging input, so these ports here are not bidirectional. This is unfortunate because the Oupes 600 actually has a 60 watt port that you can charge it via a USB-C input, and I would have loved to see that on these larger models, but they do not accept bidirectional USB-C. Now, of course, the last way to charge up this power station is by using solar panels. Now, this has an input range of 12 to 30 volts. So you can only use 12 volt solar panels on this in parallel. You cannot connect them in series. So let's go ahead and take this outside and do a solar charging demo. Okay, so let's go ahead and do some solar testing on the Oupes 1800. I'm going to be using 4 of my 180 watt Bouge RV solar panels today. The solar conditions are mostly clear, just a little bit of haze. It's around 100 degrees. These panels are hot. So what I've done is I've actually connected 2 of these panels in parallel and then 2 of these panels in parallel. And we're going to be over paneling this power station. So we're going to be hitting the amperage input limit. So let's go ahead and get this plugged in and see what we get. So here's a closer look of the setup. Those 2 panels with an 8mm. And then I have these 2 panels with an 8mm. Let's go ahead and plug them in. Okay, so I just plugged in the first set of panels. You can see we're charging at 206 watts. Now each of these inputs should allow 200 watts charging. So let's go ahead and plug in the second set of panels and see if we can break the 400 mark. Okay, so I just plugged in the second set of panels. You can see we're charging at 412 watts now. So indeed, you can get 200 watts input out of each of these barrel jacks. Now it's important to note that you cannot connect solar panels in series on this power station. For example, these 2 are connected in parallel, and then these 2 are connected in parallel, and those go into their individual jacks. This has an input range of 12 to 30 volts, and if you connect panels in series, you will damage the power station, so never go over just 12 volt solar panels connected in parallel. Now this is a large improvement over the other Oupes power stations that charge much slower off solar panels. For example, when you're maxing this out, you can charge this up to 100% in 3.5 hours, and the other versions charged much slower. So big improvement on the solar charging on this power station. Now the last thing I like to verify when testing the charging on any power station is to make sure that it accepts full pass-through charging. So I am dual charging it with 2 power bricks. I have a USB phone charging, I have a fan running off the 12 volt output, and I have this small heater here running off the AC inverter. We have 220 watts going out and 375 watts going in. This has been going for about 20 minutes or so without any issues, so this does support pass-through charging without a problem. Well, now that we got all the testing out of the way, I want to talk about a few other details on this power station. We're going to go ahead and start with the display. Now this power station has an excellent display. It shows you your watts input, your watts output. It gives you the estimated time remaining. It tells you an actual battery percentage and has a ring around it that kind of gives you a quick glance of how full the battery is and when it's charging. And then at the bottom, it'll tell you what's on or off, which is excellent. Now this power station comes in at around 40 pounds. Now it is a little bit heavier because of the lithium iron phosphate batteries inside, but you do get the advantage of a very low fire risk and also the extended life cycles on the battery. Now looking at actually how the power station is assembled, it has this ABS plastic. There are 2 vents on each side, and you have this huge handle on the top. Now my personal opinion is I always just want a flat top and as much compact of a power station as possible. For example, if you just took a saw and cut off the top of the power station, you'd save on 3 or 4 inches of space. And trust me, when you're going camping or you have a van life scenario, space is very limited. So I always kind of dislike when a power station has a huge handle on it. So my recommendation for a future model from Oupes would be to make it a flat top and maybe integrate the handles on the side, or make it a folding handle on the top and it would take up way less space. Now, of course, on the back of this power station, you have a integrated LED light. Now it is a diffused light, so it puts the light out in all different directions. It has a low mode, it has a high mode, and a SOS emergency mode. So it's nice to have that light built in just in case you need it, because you could definitely cook off of the light there, or if you had a power outage, it would definitely light up a room really well. Now, one thing a lot of viewers have been asking me to do is actually test the email support groups for these power station companies, especially these smaller companies like this. So I actually emailed their support group mentioning that I had an issue charging this power station, said that it wouldn't charge with their solar panels anymore, and I waited for a response. Now, just FYI, I used my personal email, which is not associated at all with my YouTube channel. It's a completely different email, completely different name, and I waited. And I actually got a response back in less than 12 hours with them asking for my order number, asking about some details about the issue and what may have happened, and they were happy to move forward with the help process. So just FYI, you should get a good response from Oupes support group. Now, this power station does have a 2-year warranty, so you can rest assured if you do have an issue, you can email them at their support group. Okay guys, so you've stuck it out to the end of the video. This is the most important part. This is where we're going to put the power station through my new power station grading system and give it a score of 1 to 10 based on its performance and price. This will help us to see how this stacks up against any other power station that I've tested. Now, I have a full spreadsheet of all the details you'd ever want to know about the power stations I've tested. I'll include that down in the video description if you want to check it out. So let's go ahead and start with the Oupes 1800. Starting with the first grading point, can this charge up to 100% in less than 4 hours? That's important in an emergency or in a power outage. You want to get power into this fast so you can keep your stuff going. This will charge in 4 hours if you have 2 charging power bricks, which it only comes with 1, or if you have the solar maxed out, it'll charge in 3.5 hours. Number 2, does this support pass-through charging? Yes, this can charge and discharge at the same time with no issues. I didn't see any issues while we were testing that. Number 3, does this have a pure sine wave inverter? Yes, it puts out 110 volts, a pure sine wave at 60 hertz. I didn't see any issues while we were testing it, and it actually had a pretty clean output. Number 4, does this have a regulated DC output? Yes, it's regulated at 12.7 volts through the entire state of charge. Number 5, does this have an informational display? Yes, it shows you everything you want to know, like your watts input, your watts output, your battery percentage, and your estimated time remaining. Number 6, does this have any auto shut-off settings on the DC output? For example, if you're wanting to run a fan through the night, or a night light, or a 12-volt compressor fridge, or a CPAP, you don't want this thing shutting off when you're sleeping. So I like to test to make sure it stays on, and yes, the DC output does stay enabled for 24 hours and probably longer. Number 7, let's go ahead and grade the USBc output on this power station. First of all, does it have USBc? Yes, it does. Does it support 100 watts output? No, it doesn't. And does it support bidirectional charging? No, it doesn't. So unfortunately, we did see some issues with USBc, so I kind of don't even want to give it a point here at all, but it did charge fine at 18 watts, so we'll at least give it 0.33 points. Number 8, this one's really important. Does this meet at least 85% of its advertised capacity? Now, during our AC discharge test, we were able to get 88% capacity. So yes, we did hit at least 85%, and that's a respectable number versus the other 2 Oupes power stations. Those both scored under 80%. So 88% on the AC inverter, very good. Number 9, it's important that this charges up quickly with solar panels, because if the power's out and you only have solar to charge, you can't wait around all day, because most people have around 5 decent hours of solar per day. So this will actually charge in 3.5 hours with full solar panels plugged into both charging ports, so you can get a point there. And the last one, which is really important, is this power station priced at 80 cents a watt hour or less? Now, unfortunately, this comes in at 94 cents a watt hour, which means it's priced in the premium category, which is usually where you'll see like UPS mode, smart app functionality, wireless charging, fast charging input. And we didn't really see any of that on here, so you kind of have to ask the question, is this priced correctly for what it is? Now, if we add up all the points for this power station grading system, this comes in at a total of 8.33 points, so it is a respectable score, did fairly well. The only 2 things that kind of hurt the scoring were the USBc and the actual price per watt hour. So we're coming to the end of the video here, and I just want to give you guys some final thoughts about the Oupes 1800. So hopefully after all this video, you guys can make a good decision on if this power station is right for you. The main purpose to my review videos is to give you guys the facts about how these perform, to give you guys all the features and benefits of each one, and then you guys can make the best decision, because everyone has a different use case. So someone may want a bigger power station or a smaller power station, or choose a brand over another. And so there are some benefits why you'd want to go with a power station like this. Now, the other competition that is very similar to the Oupes 1800 would be the FF-Power or Alcatel P2001. It has similar capacity, even though it's rated higher, and it's actually priced similarly as well. This one's just a little bit cheaper on sale, but the other ones charge faster and they have UPS mode. They actually have 200-watt USBc outputs that function as well. The Bluetti AC200P also had a huge price drop lately. That one has a lot more capacity, it charges faster via solar, and it has some other options that this one doesn't have. So it's important to know your options, and that's why I like to do all these review videos to make you guys educated so you guys can make the best decision. Now, please give me a thumbs up if you liked the video, and I'd love to hear your guys' feedback about this power station down in the video comment section. So throw a comment on the video, let me know what you guys think or what option you went with or what you plan to go with if it's not this one. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, I invite you guys to subscribe. Hopefully we'll see you guys in the next video.